My Gavan and Melanine, and well met indeed. I am Arakir Galadirthan, the head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, but welcome today to another lore video. And I hope this one will tie in very nicely with the last one, with the Tengwa. For today, we discuss Feanor. Now, a usual gump for the video, none of the images were created by myself. They are all created by others, and copyright remains with those people. Should you have a problem with the image on the video, if it is yours, then do just contact me and we will discuss it and arrange from there. Other than that, we can just dive straight in and get to it. So, Feanor, this is one of the first stories that I'm going to bring you dedicated purely to the First Age, for Feanor lives and resides within it. Or, not really the First Age, but we'll call it the First Age. The years of the trees, and Feanor sadly departs before the First Age. Does the First Age begin with the rising of the moon or the sun? Anywho, so Feanor. Now, before we discuss Feanor in depth and his true story, let's just have a little look, first of all, at his family tree. Now, Feanor is arguably one of the most famous elves from the First Age. Much of what Melkor does at the very beginning but Melkor's descent into absolute pure evil, the point at which he is no longer redeemable, revolves around Feanor. So the story is very intertwined. So Melkor is going to play a large part of this video as well. But first of all, let's just have a little look at who Feanor's family is, and I'll do this first rather than at the end. So Feanor is the son of Finwe. Finwe, you can see at the very top there. And Finwe is the king of the Noldor, which is one of the three tribes, for want of a better word, of the elves. The others, of course, being the Vanyar and the Teleri. And Finwe leads the Noldor. He is their king, and he remains their king when they arrive in Valinor after the long and great journey. And his first son is Feanor, of who this video concerns. Feanor is the son of Miriel and Finwe. Now, Feanor himself then marries a Nerdinel, which we'll cover later on, and he has 7 sons. And these are Maethros the Tall, Maglor the Mighty Singer, Celegorm the Fair, Caranthir the Dark, Curufin the Crafty, and Amrod and Amras the Twins, who are hunters. And as you can also note there, it's not covered in this image, but it is with the asterisk. Curufin is the father of Celebrimbor. So Celebrimbor is the grandson of Feanor. And for those who don't know, Celebrimbor is the creator of the rings. The 3 for the elves, the 7 for the dwarves, and the 9 for humans. Celebrimbor created them all with the help of Sauron. So Feanor's crafting skill pervades through his sons onto his grandson. But as you can see, Finwe has a second wife, Indis of the Vanyar. And Indis gives Finwe 2 other sons, and from these sons eventually comes Elrond and Elros under Fingolfin, Feanor's half-brother, and under Finarfin, Feanor's other half-brother, comes Galadriel. Now, the reason I point out Elrond, Elros, Gil-galad, and Galadriel is because, of course, they predominantly affect the Third and Second Ages, and that's where most of us know them from. Whereas in the First Age, Fingolfin, Finarfin, Feanor, they're all far more linked. Now, what is not shown here... it is shown here. So Feanor is the mightiest in skill of his 3 brothers, of the son of Finwe. He's the mightiest in skill in word and hand. So he's the most persuasive verbally, and he's also the most knowledgeable craft-wise, and he does indeed create so many things. Now, his brother Fingolfin is the physically strongest. He's also described as being steadfast and valiant. And then Finarfin the third, he is the fairest and most wise of heart. So Feanor is the creator, Fingolfin is the warrior, and Finarfin is the lover, for basic terms for them all. Fingolfin's sons, as you can see, are Fingon and Turgon, and he has a daughter, Arathel the White. And Finarfin's sons are Finrod Felagund, the Lord of Caves. He plays a large part later on. Orodreth, Angrod Egnor, and of course Galadriel. Now, what should also be noted is that the 5 children of Finarfin, not especially Galadriel, she's a bit of an oddity really, but the 4 sons are incredibly friendly with the 7 sons of Feanor. They all get on incredibly well, and that is something that needs to be noted because it has an impact later on in the story. But Feanor does not like his brothers, as we'll cover in a moment. But that is just a little snapshot of his family tree. That's his immediate relatives and his relations. So let's then dive into the actual story of Feanor himself. So Feanor is born to Finwe and Miriel. And at this time, Melkor is currently chained in Aman. He's been captured from Middle-earth by the Valar, by Tulkas, and dragged back to Aman. And he currently lies bound in chains, I believe, in the halls of Mandos. And this is a period of time known as the Noontide of Valinor. This is a blessed time. This is a time where there is absolute peace. There isn't even a hint of evil, a hint of insurrection, not resurrection. There's no badness. I can't think of a better word for it. It's the peak of Valinor's peacetime and power. And Feanor is born in this time. Now, Feanor's father name, because elves all have a father name and a mother name for... It's a basic example of it. They tend to go by their father name, but in some cases they go by their mother name. And the mother name tends to be the name that you would actually get, as in a name that they would use. And the father name would be more akin to an official name. So in the same way that in our world, the example I always give is in Iceland, the surname tends to be the name of the father plus the word son. So like Yorickson is Yorick's son. And that would kind of be your father name. But your mother name would be your given name. And Feanor's father name is Cura Finwe, which is just son of Finwe. Or crafty Cura, it's the same aspect from Cura Fin, who comes later on. But it's Cura Finwe is his father name. But he goes by his mother's name, Feanor, which means spirit of fire. However, such is the power and strength within Feanor that Miriel... The birth consumes her power. It's noted that Finwe and Miriel are deeply in love, as all elves are. But the birth of Feanor destroys her. And she proclaims to Finwe that she can have no more children after Feanor, for the strength that would have nourished the life of many has gone fully into Feanor. She is physically weak after she gives birth to Feanor. And she is taken to the Gardens of Lorien, which is one of the fairest places in Valinor, where it's hoped she will recoup her strength and essentially live her days happily. But in the Gardens of Lorien, she falls to sleep and her spirit leaves her. She dies, essentially giving birth to Feanor. Her body remains in the Gardens of Lorien, but her spirit goes to the halls of Mandos and does not return. She is not re-embodied. So Miriel goes out of the story altogether. And Finwe is absolutely distraught at this, and he frequently returns to the Gardens of Lorien to just sit by her side. And it's arguably because of this strength of love he had for Miriel that then passes on to Feanor, which is why he then loves Feanor almost above all else. The love Finwe has for Feanor is extremely strong. And this again plays a part a little later on. But Miriel, Feanor's mother, dies, and Feanor therefore grows up motherless. Now, Feanor's early years are marked by quick growth and mastery of all things. He is very quick to learn. He's very, very... his willpower is very strong. He is very strong. He masters crafting very quickly, and he becomes a renowned smith, even in the early days. And it's noted, Tolkien says that few ever changed his course by counsel and none by force. So there are very few people he would listen to that would change his mind, and no one would ever be able to force him to change his mind or physically force him to change to do something. He's an incredibly determined elf. And it is the reason he is called Spirit of Fire is because of that. He is so strong. He's such an oddity in amongst the elves. There's none really like Feanor ever again. He burns with passion for everything he does. And now Feanor learns a great many things from a renowned master smith called Matan. And Matan is one of the favoured of Aule, the Valar who creates. And Matan has learnt a great deal from Aule, and he passes this on to Feanor. But not only does he pass on his skill and his knowledge, he also passes on his daughter. And Feanor marries Nerdanel. Now, Nerdanel it says at first that Nerdanel is able to actually influence Feanor. She's one of the few who has sway over him. And indeed, in time, she gives birth to 7 children from Feanor. And their love for one another is great. But Feanor's strength, again, and his determination leads them to become estranged. Originally she is able to restrain him when he goes off when he gets his mind totally into something, and his passion burns, and she's able to restrain him when there's a threat to him. But over time, he becomes more and more steadfast in what he wants, and they become estranged. And Nerdnell really only kind of exists in the story to give birth to his children and nothing more. She doesn't really do anything else, and she quickly falls out of the story. Feanor became very, very skilled in the crafting of jewels in his early years as well. So prior to the Silmaril, he was able to create masterful works. And some such works are jewels whereby they would appear colourless. So they would appear as a kind of a murky, milky coloured stone and nothing more. But when night fell, if you held them to the stars, they would blaze with blue and silver colours. And he was an absolute master with these jewels. And he just had a love for creating all things. It is also, of course, at this time where we tie into the previous video, where Feanor creates the Feanorian script, the Tengwa. He takes what Rumil created and he amends it and edits it to his own. And we get to the script that is used right up to the Third Age. So he's not just a smith, he's not just a blacksmith, he is also a craftsman of all things. Save apparently for relationships, because he doesn't really hold on to any of those. Now, then the first real event not first real event, but Feanor's path is one that goes downhill, shall we say. And a point that may be said to be the start of that downhill turn is the remarriage of his father. Now, this is almost unheard of. In fact, I don't even think I can think of another example. And if you can, please feel free to pop it in the comments. But Finwe marries Indis of the Vanyar. He remarries. And the reason I say this is unheard of is because Tolkien writes that elves are like swans and they marry for life. Despite the fact that their lives never end, they marry for life. And so obviously Finwe doesn't divorce and then remarry. He remarries because he becomes a widower. But it is still very, very unknown. Now, Feanor does not like Indis. He does not like her one bit, and this sort of animosity he has for his stepmother passes to his then stepbrothers, Fingolfin and Finarfin. And Tolkien writes that the shadow of Miriel remains in the house forever, and Finwe loves Feanor more than his new wife, it is said. Now, the image I have of Indis there is of importance purely because the elves have different hair depending on who they are, and Indis, being one of the Vanyar, exclusively has golden hair. And she is said to be very beautiful and very, as all elven women, she's welcoming, she's loving, she's caring, she's friendly. And Finwe falls for her strongly and remarries. And it's also noted that by this time, Finwe has stopped returning to the body of Miriel in the Gardens of Lorien, and she too falls away from the story. Now, it's also noted that had Finwe not remarried, Feanor may not have had that underlying animosity towards his brothers, and it may have altered the course of the First Age's events had Finwe not remarried. But that's such a what if that it's a difficult one to really pass on. But so Indis and Finwe have married, and Feanor now has to deal with this. But then the great change comes. Melkor becomes unbound. The noontide of Valinor is coming to a close, and Melkor becomes released. Now, this is an interesting one. Melkor is an absolute master of just being devious. And because he has one massive advantage over the other Valar, and that is that he understands evil. Now, I know that's a difficult thing to get your head around, but Melkor comes before Manwë. He's been chained for literally millennia now. He comes before Manwë and the other Valar, and he professes that he has changed. He understands that he was wrong to try and claim the whole of the world for himself. And being as a Valar as the others that are now judging him, he seeks to just assist the world. But of course, Melkor actually hates everyone and everything. He especially hates elves. Never forget that. Melkor absolutely loathes them. He would, if it were up to him, they would all be killed. None of this enslaving nonsense. Kill them all. He hates elves, absolutely, with a burning passion. And he finds that the best way that he can bring them down is through trickery rather than outright war. But first of all, he's got to be released. And he plays on the fact that Manwë, being a being of pure goodness, is totally unable to comprehend the thought of evil. Manwë doesn't understand dominion. He doesn't understand conquest. He doesn't understand mastership. He just is. And he thinks everyone else just wants to be, full stop. He doesn't think that there are those that would seek power. They would seek to kill their fellow brothers. And so he doesn't understand that Melkor could be lying. He totally buys into that Melkor has changed. Now, Arome and Tulkas aren't as convinced, but they go along with Manwë because Manwë is the ruler of the Valar. But Tulkas is always cautious of Melkor. And that's good, because Manwë's a bit of a sucker, really, and arguably all of the problems in Middle-earth are because Manwë allows Melkor to be released. It's not really arguably. That is fact. Had Melkor remained chained in the halls of Mandos for time immemorial, then there wouldn't have been problems. There would have been no problems. But Manwë allows him to be released because he can't understand that Melkor hasn't changed. But Melkor at this time, like all of the Valar, is able to change his form, and so now that he's been released, he works his way amongst the Noldor. He works his way amongst all elves. He tries to find those who he can change, who are malleable to his will. And so he can come at the Noldor as looking as fair as he wishes, for at this time he is able to change form freely, much like Sauron was in the beginning. And Melkor, above all things, is also a creator. Let's not forget that Melkor is the strongest of the Valar. And he loves creating as well. He is as much a creator as Feanor, and so he offers freely his knowledge to any elf who will take it. But Feanor never trusts Melkor. There is a deep-seated hatred between the two right from the outset. But this is partially as well because Feanor, from the beginning, is covetous. He doesn't like others having or using his creations, and he fears any who would come at him with kind words, for he fears they are nothing more than an attempt to get his belongings. Now, Melkor at this time, when he's wheedling his way amongst all the elves, is he tries to come to all of them. So he goes to the Teleri. He goes to the Vanyar first, but the Vanyar are so devoted to the Valar that they see through Melkor and they shrug him off. No, they want nothing to do with him. The Vanyar are basically mindless drones who just love the Valar. They do everything the Valar say, and they follow them almost blindly. None of the Vanyar really ever play a part in the story. In fact, indeed, Indis is one of the few that we even know the name of. They are not really a part of the story at any point, to be honest. But Melkor also completely ignores the Teleri. He deems that the Teleri are too weak and pathetic to really be bothered with. He doesn't think they can help him. But in the Noldor, he finds that kindred spirit. He finds that they want to create. They have the power. They have strength. The Noldor are the physically strongest of the three tribes of the elves, and Melkor tries to win them over, and he succeeds quite well. But then comes Feanor's crowning achievement, the Silmarils. Now, I've seen some people say Silmarilli, but in the book The Silmarillion, the plural of Silmaril is written as Silmarils. So I'm going to go with that. But Feanor creates the Silmaril. Now, this is unsure as to whether this is foresight or a desire to preserve, but the Silmaril are created with the light of the two trees of Aman. Now, to briefly talk about the trees, at this period of time, there is no sun and there is no moon. Light is given to the world from two trees in Valinor, known as Telperion and Laurelin. And one tree basically gives sunlight and the other gives moonlight, and together they light the world. And the light from these trees is said to be outstanding, and it is indeed, in fact, the mere fact that the elves have lived under the light of the trees in Valinor, plus the fact that they're in Valinor, that makes the high elves high elves. The reason they are distinct from the lesser elves of Middle-earth is because they made it to Valinor, and a large part of that is the light of the trees. So Feanor wants to save these trees. Now, the reason I use foresight will become apparent in a moment, but Feanor creates the Silmaril, and within them he blends the light of both trees. And these jewels are his masterwork. They are his pièce de la résistance. There is nothing greater than the Silmaril. And they are incredibly dear to him. It is arguable that there is only one thing he loves more than the Silmarils, and that is his own father, Finwe. He arguably loves the Silmarils more than his own children. As I say, arguably. there are arguments on both sides. The actual material that the outer casing is made from, none ever know what he makes them from. He never divulges this secret. So we never find out what the outer shell of them is. But the Silmarils deserve a little extra mention indeed, because they are potentially the entire story of the Silmarillion and the First Age is based around these jewels. They constantly change hands. Everything about Feanor from this point on evolves around them. They're a major part of the Silmarillion and the First Age in general. Now, these gems, of course, are magnificent, and all appreciate them, but none covet them more than Melkor. Melkor already hates elves. He hates Feanor on top of that, and now he sees this amazing thing that Feanor's created, and he wants it. He wants it very, very much. But Melkor just obviously realises that he can't outright declare war against the elves. He hasn't got an army. He's got no one to support him. So he's got to use deviousness. And this is what he does again. And Melkor is his master of turning people's minor paranoia into full-blown craziness. And so Melkor comes amongst the Noldor once again, whispering and telling lies to different elves. And he ensures that they turn against each other by making them fear that they are going to turn against each other. So he ensures that lies come to Feanor, because Feanor will not speak with Melkor. He never has an audience with him until a little later on, and even then it's just to banish him. He just does not speak with Melkor. So Melkor needs to find other ways to ensure that these whispers and these lies make it to Feanor's ears. And he does this. He manages to get a rumour growing that Fingolfin and his sons, Turgon and whoever the other one is, Fingon? Yeah, Fingon, Fingolfin and Turgon. He gets the rumour to Feanor that they are seeking to essentially usurp Feanor and take the Silmarils for themselves. But he's also spreading even worse rumour that Fingolfin is seeking to usurp Finwe. He's saying he makes sure that Feanor believes that Fingolfin is kind of desiring the high kingship, because the Noldor have a high king and it's Finwe. He is king of all the Noldor. And Fingolfin, his second son, Melkor spreads the lies that he wants this kingship. But what he also does is he makes Fingolfin and Finarfin think that Feanor wants to attack them. So he makes sure that the two brothers who are 100% brothers, come to fear their 50% brother, and vice versa. And he does this by spreading lies and whispers. But he does something far worse at this time as well, because at this time, Valinor is completely, basically exempt of weapons. Not because of any rule, but because the elves haven't had to fight anything, and they've never crafted weapons. And Melkor, to add to his devious plan, ensures that they learn crafting of weapons, weaponsmithing. And the Noldor then begin crafting weapons in secret. But what he does here again is genius. He makes each individual elf that he comes to think that they're the only person he has taught the weaponsmithing skill to. So Feanor begins crafting weapons, and as does Fingolfin and Finarfin, but none of them know that the other one is doing it. So they all feel like they have the leg up, which is, again, very clever. Now, none of the elves ever let anyone know that they've crafted these weapons out of that aspect, and they hide them, but they do begin crafting armour and shields, and they readily wear these around Valinor, or more specifically, Tirion, which is the city that the Noldor live in. It's called Tirion. It's on the Hill of Tuna. Now, Feanor, being already pretty paranoid because he loves these Silmarils and he's starting to get a kind of greed toward them almost, he easily buys into these lies. And he openly declares to the rest of the Noldor that he would happily leave Valinor and what he calls the thraldom of the Valar. Because not only does Melkor spread lies that the elves want to attack each other, but he also constantly undermines the power of the Valar by telling the elves that they are purely slaves to the will of those above them. And they're being held there against their will, and the Valar want nothing more than to see them ruined, and that's why they won't let them leave. But none of this is true. The Valar let anyone leave. That Melkor just does well at spreading these lies, and Feanor buys into them very, very readily. And he kind of already doesn't like the Valar for reasons really unknown to anyone else. But Finwe is very distressed to hear that these rumours are floating around and that Feanor is declaring against the Valar, and he calls a meeting of all the Noldorin lords. And they come. But Fingolfin arrives first, which is a minor point, but it does play a part. And Fingolfin arrives first, and he bids his father to restrain Feanor. He begs his father to stop him spreading all these lies, stop him speaking so ill of all of us, like, just control your son. But Feanor then enters the meeting at this point and sees the two of them talking together and feels that they're plotting against him, that Finwe is plotting with his other sons against Feanor. But Feanor is not in the garb of the usual citizenry. He has come to this meeting fully armed and armoured, in red plumage, and he brings a sword, which is an outrageous feat, because swords, remember, no one really knows that anyone else is creating swords. And Finwe arrives with his weapon. And after seeing his brother talking with his father and fearing that they're in cahoots, he draws his sword on his own brother and he cries, "Get thee gone and take thy due place," referencing the fact that Feanor is the eldest and therefore next in line son, and his counsel should be heard above his brother's. Fingolfin doesn't say any word at this, he simply bows and begins to leave, but then Feanor stops him by the door, puts his sword on his breast, and tells him that his sword is sharper than Fingolfin's tongue, and he warns him a second time that he will not hesitate to deal with his brothers if they rise up in this way. Now, obviously, news of this, no sword has been drawn in Valinor forever, and to think an elf turning on an elf, the Valar are distressed at this. And they then summon Feanor to them. They summon him before all of the Valar, and he is judged. They believe him to be the ringleader of all of this dissent, all of these lies. But upon summoning Feanor and those they believe to be the other ringleaders, they quickly establish that Melkor is behind it. And upon learning that Melkor is causing dissent and trouble, Tulkas immediately leaves this judgment hearing, and he goes off to find Melkor. But it should also be noted that Feanor is not held to be blameless, and despite the fact that it's Melkor's lies that have created this unease in Valinor, they hold Feanor to fault as well, and he, for his crime of drawing a sword on his own brother and speaking out against the peaceful rulers of Valinor, he is banished. He is not allowed to return to Tirion for 12 years, and he is banished with the Noldor that follow him. And then he heads north and he establishes the town of Formenos, which just means northern city. Now his 7 sons go with him, and also his father goes with him, because remember, as I said at the beginning, Finwe loves Feanor above all else. And so Feanor says that if my son is to be banished, then I shall be banished also. And he follows Feanor to Formenos. And Fingolfin then kind of takes up the rulership of the Noldor in Tirion, whilst Finwe remains as the High King in banishment. Now, Melkor manages to elude Tulkas and he just goes off into hiding. But he then, kind of out of the blue, comes to Formenos. And he speaks directly with Feanor, and he beseeches Feanor to join with him. He says, look, the Valar have done exactly as I've said. They've banished you for merely speaking freely. And he says, they will covet more. They will want more. You'll only be free and safe if you are with me. And Feanor begins to actually think, actually, you know what? I kind of agree. I maybe agree with this. But then Melkor overstretches his hand. And he mentions that the Silmarils will not be safe if they remain in Valinor. And the mere mention of the fact that someone might get Feanor's Silmarils enrages him, and he sends Melkor away. And it's at this point that Melkor then, we believe, leaves Aman. He leaves Valinor for good, basically. But he doesn't. He flees Valinor, and the Teleri at Alqualonde, which is their capital, they see this great darkness leaving Valinor, and it's assumed by all that Melkor has left Aman. He's gone back to Middle-earth. But unbeknownst to everyone, Melkor has actually gone out into the sea and then come back to Valinor. And he resides for quite some time at the far south, as you can see on the map at the moment. So down below the Pelori, which are the mountains, in the regions around Avathar, Melkor resides there. And what he does there, you'll find out in just a moment. So Melkor is gone. And Feanor and the Noldor that are loyal to him have been banished, but Melkor will not be gone forever. Manwë calls all the inhabitants of Aman to a great feast in an attempt to heal the wounds that have occurred from Melkor's deeds. And everyone goes, except for the elves at Formenos. From Formenos, Feanor goes alone to this meeting. So all the Teleri, or most of the Teleri, Noldor and Vanir go to the meeting, but Feanor goes alone from Formenos. And Finwe also does not go, because he declares that as long as Feanor is not allowed to enter Tirion, Finwe considers himself unkinged, and he shall not stand in a public meeting in his role as king, for he feels that until Feanor is allowed back to their land, their homeland, then he shall not come back, and nor shall he be the king. So Feanor goes alone. Now, Feanor, Manwë calls Fingolfin and Feanor before him, and in front of Manwë, Fingolfin basically apologizes for what he's done, and he pledges to follow where Feanor will lead. And he means this, as we shall see later. He considers all harm forgotten. And by saying and declaring these words, Feanor, after his 12-year period is up, would be allowed to return to Tirion. For the second part of his banishment is you will be allowed to return in 12 years if your essentially brothers forgive you. And Fingolfin declares that he forgives Feanor, and Feanor should be allowed to return. And he considers all the harms forgotten. And so a great feast is had. The land is rejoicing. Feanor is a little unsure at this, but he's pleased nevertheless. But then Melkor returns. And this is where we learn what Melkor has been doing, for he has been residing in the south, whereupon he happens upon Ungoliant. Now, Ungoliant is said to be extra voidal, if that's a word. She is something not Maya, not Ainur, not Valar. They're all Ainur's, both of the others, but she is something else. She is almost a representation of the void itself. She does nothing but devour, and she is a giant spider. And Melkor meets with Ungoliant, and they hatch a little plan to ruin the world. With the power that Ungoliant has, Melkor foresees a chance to bring the bloody Valar down, for he hates them as much as he hates elves. And they hatch a plan to drain the light from the two trees, and this they do with everybody in, with the Valar in their meeting. Melkor and Ungoliant come upon the two trees, and with a giant spear, Melkor stabs the trees. And it's said that the sap comes out of them as if they were bleeding. And as he drains these trees dry, Ungoliant eats what comes out of the trees. She devours the very light and life essence of the trees themselves. And Valinor is plunged into darkness. Now, this darkness is almost a being of its own. It's not a darkness as is in the absence of light. It is almost a darkness as if it is a thing, as if it is a living, breathing thing. And this darkness is also enshrouded around Melkor and Ungoliant as they begin to flee north. Now, the Valar obviously immediately want to know what's happened, and they try to chase Melkor, but they can't penetrate this great darkness, and Melkor and Ungoliant have managed to escape. But after a time, Manwë manages to clear this darkness with the power of the wind, which is his to control, and the stars then give light to Valinor, and they are able to see once again. Now, Yavanna, they then all go to the trees, and Yavanna says that if Feanor were able to break open the Silmaril, she might be able to restore the life of the trees, and they will be able to live again. But Feanor says that to break open the Silmarils would be akin to killing him, for they and he are intertwined. And therefore he would be the first to die in Aman, properly dies, and his life removed from him by an external force rather than desiring to die. Like, it's difficult because Miriel has kind of already died, but Feanor declares that he would be the first to die. But I think it's partially different because Miriel kind of gives up her spirit, whereas Feanor would have his spirit removed. And I think that's the presence here. He would be killed, not the first to die, the first to be killed. Now, Mandos is one of the Valar, and he is the ruler of the Halls of the Dead, for want of a better word. And he's also a grumpy and very unhelpful bugger, because at this point, when Feanor says, "I shall be the first to be killed," rather than giving anyone any useful advice, Mandos simply says a very ominous message, and he says, "No, you would not be the first." And no one actually knows what this means. They're like, what is this bloody grumpy bastard talking about? And it's not until a messenger then arrives that Mandos' foretelling becomes true. Although why he doesn't just tell them himself is totally beyond me. He's so unhelpful all the time. But anyway, Mandos says that you wouldn't be the first to die. No one really knows what this means, but then a messenger comes to this gathering at the trees with ill news. For Melkor and Ungoliant, during the time that there was this great darkness and there's chaos ensued, They came upon Formenos and they destroyed the city, or they broke into the city and they stole every jewel within its hoard, including the Silmarils. But not only did they steal the Silmarils, for they also killed Finwe. And Finwe therefore becomes the first elf to be killed in Valinor, and that is what Mandos meant. Now, it's also a point of note, just to give Finwe a little nod here, is Finwe died because he alone stood before this great darkness that was Ungoliant and Melkor moving together. And Finwe stood unmoved. He challenged Melkor and Ungoliant. He was easily slain, but he didn't run away, and that's a strength character that is passed on to his sons. So, upon hearing that Finwe has been slain, Formenos has been ravaged, and the Silmarils have been stolen, Feanor names Melkor Morgoth, and he is forever known under this name, the Black Enemy. The elves refuse to use his real name any longer, and they call him Morgoth for his deeds. And there is great strife. But if we follow Ungoliant and Melkor just for a moment, they flee north. They come through the region called the Helcarax. Now, this is an ice flow that connects Valinor and Middle-earth. And they cross into Middle-earth. And Ungoliant and Melkor have been moving together with this great darkness around them, and they've escaped. But when they arrive in Beleriand, Ungoliant then demands everything they took from Formenos. She has such a hunger, she wants to eat everything. And Melkor gives up the jewels that they stole, except for the Silmarils. And he hands over the jewels, and she devours them all, one by one by one. But she says, with your right hand you give me freely, but open your left, for I desire more. And in the left hand is the Silmarils. And Melkor says, no. Now, the Silmarils, it also should be noted, they are currently burning his hand. He is enduring immense pain to hold on to these Silmarils. And this is arguably the good-bad kind of thing. Like, the light of the trees is such a pure goodness that it burns Melkor purely to hold it. But that is conjecture. I'm not saying that's fact. But anyway, the Silmarils are burning them to hold him, and still he defies Ungoliant. He's in intense pain. And Ungoliant then traps him in her webs. She ensnares him totally and utterly. And with all of this pain combined together, he screams. Melkor screams an ungodly scream. And it echoes throughout all of the world. And it has one key advantage, and that is that his scream is heard in the ruins of Angband, his old fortress in the north of Beleriand. And in the ruins of Angband reside the Balrogs. The Balrogs were not destroyed. They hear his scream and they come for Melkor. And they come upon Ungoliant as a great and ungodly flame. And she is terrified and she flees south. And they manage to save Melkor. Now, Melkor then, a little later on in the story, but Melkor and the Balrogs return to Angband. And he then creates the Thangorodrim, or he raises up the Thangorodrim, which are three great mountainous peaks which act as the gates of his new citadel, fortress, tunnel network thing. And he sets the Silmaril in a crown that he wears upon his head. But it is noted that he never, ever forgets the pain of holding those Silmarils. Every single minute of the day it is as if he is in constant pain. And it's also noted that the burning of his hand is partially the reason why Melkor can now no longer change shape. He is now fixed forever as this sort of being of evil. So he's shot himself in the foot a bit. But he's managed to get away with the Silmarils, and he re-establishes himself in Beleriand, and he never again returns to Valinor. He's done with that now. He resides in Beleriand and then takes up war with all the Free Peoples for the rest of the First Age. But back in Valinor, Feanor is not sitting idle. Now, Feanor rebels against the ban of the Valar, and he goes to Tirion. He's not allowed in Tirion, but he goes there anyway, and he stands atop the hill of Tuna, and he calls all the Noldor to him, and he commands, essentially, that they rise up. Now, of course, Finwe has died, so the High Kingship has passed to Feanor, so he is now the High King, although they haven't crowned him or anything, but he's like, de facto, he is de jure the king. And he stands upon this hill and he calls all those to him that they would fight with him. And he then swears an oath. But first of all, he asks, why should we serve these Valar? They can't even secure their own lands against their great enemy. That we're not safe here. We need to track him down and deal with this ourselves. And he says, will any stand with me? And he calls the Noldor to follow him, and he swears an oath. And as he does, his sons immediately jump up and swear the oath with him. And this oath becomes very much the downfall of their entire family. So his sons join him, and he declares that Manwë is the witness of the swearing of this oath, Manwë himself. And he says, with Manwë as witness, that the Noldor will pursue with vengeance and hatred to the ends of the world, Valar, demon, elf, or man as yet unborn, or any creature great or small, good or evil, that time should bring forth unto the end of days, whoso should hold or take or keep a Silmaril from their possession. So his oath is such that he and his sons, because they swear the oath as well, and the 8 of them all together, they swear that they will not rest, and nor will they save any who hold the Silmaril from them. It is now their charge to return the Silmaril to their possession, and they won't stand, no one will stand in the way of that. And given that there are 3 kinslayings throughout the First Age, they literally mean no one. Now, the Valar at this point are a bit bemused, because again, they don't really understand this whole vengeance thing, this whole desirous thing. They don't desire stuff, and they can't really understand it, but they neither aid nor hinder Feanor, because Feanor then begins to march north, and the Valar neither assist him, but neither do they block him. They say all are free to come and go from Valinor as they please. So Feanor sets off with his sons, with the Noldor that will follow him. But before that they do, though, Fingolfin and Turgon, his son, they speak out against Feanor. And a kind of an argument sets in place between Feanor and his sons and Fingolfin and his sons, with Finarfin in the middle trying to calm both sides. Because remember, Finarfin is the lover, the poet, the one that would seek peace, with the other two being more warrior-like. But most of the Noldor, it's said, I read somewhere, it's about 90% or something like that, of the Noldor are swayed by Feanor and they follow him. They can't stand that their High King. So regardless of the fact that the Silmarils have been stolen, because not all the Noldor care about the Silmarils, but they can't let it stand that their High King has been slain by Melkor and the Valar are going to sit down and do nothing. So the Noldor will stand and fight for their new king. But they leave in 2 groups, with Feanor leading the first group. And he leads the first group, the most devout, the most angry with Melkor, and a second group follows on, led by Fingolfin. Because remember that despite the fact that Fingolfin and Feanor were arguing about this, and Feanor even pulled a sword on Fingolfin, Fingolfin swore that he would follow where Feanor led, saying that you are essentially going to be the High King. I will defer to you in all circumstances, for you are the elder. So Fingolfin follows him. And he goes, and he leads an army slightly behind Feanor as well. But now, Finarfin and Finrod, his son, they are said to be despaired. They are at the very back of this grand Noldorin procession, for they constantly look back at Tirion, desiring to stay. Whereas Feanor, does not look back. He never looks back. Now, I did just mention, I will say briefly, some Noldor do stay. And we do therefore get 2 distinct groups of Noldor, those that go to return to Middle-earth and those who stay in Aman. And that is a key point. So then we come on to the first of the great sadnesses of the elves, a tale told often, and that is the kinslaying of Alqualonde. And this image is provided by Ted Naismith, an excellent artist of the lore of Middle-earth. But Alqualonde is the capital of the Teleri, the seafaring elves, and it means Swan Haven. And Feanor comes to the Teleri seeing, and he says, we are chasing Melkor back to Middle-earth and your boats are going to help a great deal. Please, will you lend them to us? And Olwe, the king of the Teleri, says no. And he doesn't just say no, he in no uncertain terms says, we're not going to help you against Melkor, you're on your own, bugger off. So Feanor goes and camps outside the city for a while. But he decides, this is the fastest way and I need these ships. If the elves aren't going to help me, I'll just take them. So Feanor and the Noldor in the van, the Noldor that are at the front, they just move into the city and they begin boarding and getting the ships ready to sail. But some of the Teleri absolutely love their ships above all else, and they love the sea, and the sea is their dominion, and they begin stopping the Noldor, physically barring them. They even throw some of them into the sea to stop them from getting the ships. But of course the Noldor are mastersmiths of weaponry, and they are the strongest of the elves, and the kinslaying occurs. The Noldor begin killing the Teleri who stand in their way. Now the Teleri do fight back, but they are predominantly an archer peoples, and they're also just not very accustomed to fighting. But they do manage to beat the Noldor back through mostly sheer numbers. But the Noldor kill so many Teleri. But then Fingolfin arrives. Now he doesn't have any desire to kill Teleri, of course. But him and his Noldor arrive, and they see that there's a ruckus, and they see that Noldorin are being killed, and they assume, therefore, that there's been some sort of misunderstanding, or Melkor has got involved somehow. And so they don't realise that the Noldor essentially started it. So they rush in and they assist, and they capture the boats. And the entire procession of the Noldor sail off in the boats of the Teleri, leaving many dead in their path. Now, Ulmo of the Valar is enraged. He loves the Teleri. They are essentially his people. If the Noldorin are Aule's people and the Vanyar are Manwë's people, then the Teleri are very much Ulmo. And Ulmo is the Valar of the sea, the Valar of the sea. Singular and plural, I always get between them because life's too short. But Ulmo can't do anything because the Valar have sworn they will neither assist nor hinder the Noldor. So Ulmo can't do anything. But Ossë, one of the Maya that deals with coastal waters, he is also enraged, and he drowns many of the ships, ensuring the Noldor go with them. But the Noldor do escape, and they begin sailing north because they can't go out into the open ocean. They follow the coastline north as they go along, because the ships and seafaring is still very early days at this point, and they haven't really got proper seagoing vessels. And also the Noldor don't really know how to sail, so they stay very close to the shore. And this is then when we get a very key event that will affect Noldor, even Galadriel. And this adds some weight to the point about her saying, "I passed the test" in the films. This is what she means. And it's called the Doom of Mandos. And there's a lot of script, and I will read it out. But the Noldorin are sailing north. Now, they've killed all of these Teleri, and as they sail north, and they come to a region on the northern tip of Valinor, and a great figure appears before them on the shoreline. Now, it's unclear if this is a messenger of the Mandos, or if this is Mandos himself. But a great figure appears on the shore, and he cries out to the Noldor, and it's called the Prophecy of the North, or the Doom of the Noldor, or the Doom of Mandos, or the Curse of the Noldor, any of the above. And the messenger, in a very loud voice, says this. He says, "Tears unnumbered ye shall shed, and the Valar will fence Valinor against you, and shut you out, so that not even the echo of your lamentation shall pass over the mountains. On the house of Feanor the wrath of the Valar lieth, from the west unto the uttermost east, and upon all that will follow them it shall be laid also. Their oath shall drive them, and yet betray them, and ever snatch away the very treasures that they have sworn to pursue. To evil end shall all things turn that they begin well, and by treason of kin unto kin, and the fear of treason, shall this come to pass. The dispossessed shall they be forever. Ye have spilled the blood of your kindred unrighteously, and have stained the land of Aman. For blood ye shall render blood, and beyond Aman ye shall dwell in death's shadow. For though Eru appointed to you to die not in Ea, and no sickness may assail you, yet slain ye may be, and slain ye shall be, by weapon and by torment and by grief. And your houseless spirits shall come then to Mandos. There long shall ye abide, and yearn for your bodies, and find little pity, though all whom ye have slain should entreat for you. And those that endure in Middle-earth and come not to Mandos shall grow weary of the world as with a great burden, and shall wane and become as shadows of regret before the younger race that cometh after. The Valar have spoken." So what Mandos is saying to them here, to break this down into non-flowery language, is you have killed your own kin, and the Valar are now barring you from Valinor. You are banned and banished forever. And from the west unto the uttermost east, the wrath of the Valar shall lay upon the Noldor. Essentially, you will not escape this wrath. And the Silmarils that you have now sworn to pursue will constantly evade you. You'll never be able to get them back. And anything that you start with a good and kind heart will end with evil, for everything you do is now tainted. He also goes on, therefore, to say that those of you that die and return to Mandos, you will be trapped and locked in my halls forever, for I shall not grant you re-embodiment. You will not walk freely amongst Valinor, unless, of course, they repent, basically. But he does also say that those of you who stay in Middle-earth, because they can't return to Valinor, and those of you who stay in Middle-earth, you will grow weak and weary, and you'll become shadows of that which you were before, and you will be far weaker than the younger race that will come now, the men. And this doom, this prophecy is laid upon them, and such is the fear placed on the hearts of many of them. Although it's not said in the actual text of the doom, the prophecy, the writing there on the screen, the Valar will allow the Noldor back if, as I say, they repent, they apologise, basically. But after this doom is said, Feanor presses on regardless, and many of the Noldor follow him, but Finarfin turns back. So Feanor, Fingolfin, their sons, they press on, but Finarfin turns back, for after hearing this doom, he is afraid and does not want this on him. And the Valar welcome him back for basically repenting. But it should be said, as I said at the beginning, this is where the fact that his sons, which is Finrod, Egnor, the other one... Hold on, let me go back. I wrote it down because I knew I'd forget it. Finrod, Orodreth, Angrod, Egnor, and Galadriel... Keely and Galadriel, she's here as well. They don't return with him, for they love Feanor's sons greatly and they wish to fight with them. So Finarfin returns with some Noldor. Some Noldor do go back with him, but he returns basically on his own. And it is then noted that Finarfin rules the High King of the Noldor in Valinor ever after, whereas the High Kingship of the Valar of the Noldor in exile passes down the line and ends with Gil-galad, because Elrond does not take up the High Kingship. So when at the time that Elrond is alive and Gil-galad has passed away, the true ruler of Imladris, if you like, is actually Finarfin back in Valinor. So there you go. Finarfin, Feanor's half-brother, returns to Valinor and does not go with him. Now they press on, and Feanor and the host with the ships, they continue on. And they sail quite close to the shore, whereby they come to the Helcarax. Now this, as I said, is the great ice bridge that connects Valinor and Beleriand. But it's not a stable feature. It's constantly shifting. And it's a very dangerous place to traverse. And they come to the Helcarax and they have to decide, do we walk it or do we try and sail it? For both are as dangerous as the other. But it's decreed that sailing is safer. But what Feanor does here is despicable. He abandons many of the Noldor here. Whilst they're discussing what to do, Feanor and those most loyal to him take the ships and they sail off, abandoning Fingolfin and their children, Fingolfin's children and Finarfin's children, at the Helcarax. And Feanor sails away with a portion of the Noldor. Now, he arrives in Middle-earth, therefore, first. And he lands at this location just here, if you can see the cursor. It's called the Firth of Drengist in the top left-hand corner. This is where they land in Middle-earth. And when they land, Maethros, his son, comes to him and says, shall we send the boats back now? Who shall we get to bring back first? And Feanor laughs this off and he says, first? What do you mean? We're not going to bring any of them back. For I am not sad at the loss of any who have stayed behind. Essentially saying, I don't care about any that have stayed behind. The ones that are here now are the ones I wanted here now. And he commands that the ships be burnt. And this they do. They burn the ships of the Teleri, thus sealing their fate in Middle-earth forever. Now Fingolfin and his sons and Galadriel and her brothers, they lead the rest of the Noldor by foot across the Helcarax. And their losses are severe. Indeed, even Turgon, who will eventually come into the story as the king of Gondolin, which is this city just here, he loses his wife, Elenwe. She dies at the crossing of the Helcarax, and many elves die on this crossing. And ever after, it is said that there is a schism between essentially those that walked across the Helcarax and those that sailed with Feanor. But it doesn't matter too much, as we'll see in just a moment. So Feanor set these ships aflame, and they begin walking inland because they're heading for Angband, which is up off the map in the north. And they head off to Angband, and what they do then is they want to set up camp. So they march inland from the sea and they make it to Mithrim. And they arrive at Lake Mithrim. And here they begin setting up camp, but Melkor is already very aware that the Noldor have come, and he's been here now for some time, rebuilding his army, rebuilding his cities. He's got the Balrogs, and he sends out an army of orcs to come down upon Feanor, and this is called the Dagor Nwyn Gileath, and this is the battle under the stars. Because remember, at this time, there's no sun, there's no moon, and the trees have been destroyed. The stars are all there are. And it's called the Dagor Nwyn Gileath for that fact. Now, the orcs outnumber the Noldor immensely, but the orcs and Noldor have yet to fight, and they are unaware how unbelievably outclassed they are. The Noldor massacre the orcs, and I mean massacre. They are severely outnumbered. We're talking easily tens of thousands outnumbered. And they kill almost every single orc. They are so powerful. Their weapons are better, their strength of arms are better, their stamina, everything about them is better, and they annihilate this orcish army. But Feanor, filled with righteous hatred for Melkor and seeing how easily he's washed away the army of Melkor, he presses forward with a small number of troops, not his sons. His sons stay behind with the main army, bringing that forward, but Feanor presses on with the quickest. And he charges down the orcs that are fleeing, and he comes to almost to Angband itself. But he is now massively cut off from his army, and Melkor, seeing that Feanor has charged in alone, sends out the Balrogs. And the Balrogs, led by their lord Gothmog, they entrap, encircle, and defeat Feanor's little band until it is just Feanor alive alone. Now, Feanor fights them off very, very well, but he is constantly being wounded, and eventually Gothmog fells him. He knocks him to the ground, and he leaves him with mortal wounds. But at this point, the 7 sons of Feanor arrive with their army, and the Balrogs, seeing they can't hold this off, they retreat back to Angband. And the 7 sons of Feanor lift him from the battlefield, and they begin marching him away. But Feanor, realizing that his wounds are mortal, he bids them set him down, and atop a mountain range in sight of Angband, he looks across the plains and sees the Thangorodrim, and it is only then does he realize that the Noldor have no hope against Melkor. He realizes they will never be able to stop the power of the most powerful being in Middle-earth alone by strength of arms. And he thrice curses Morgoth's name, calling out to him, hating him with every inch of his being. But then it is too great, and Feanor passes away. So in sight of the Thangorodrim, so close to his victory, so close to his enemy that he hates with all his might, he dies. But such is the strength of Feanor's spirit that it burns his body to ash. His entire body is burnt to ash as his spirit passes from it. And his spirit does not go to the halls of Mandos. His spirit does go to the halls of Mandos, but it resides there till the end of time. He never returns to Valinor in bodily form. For Feanor's oath, as you will find out as the story goes on, that is sworn with his sons, is never fulfilled. And to this day, the oath is still unfulfilled. And the oath binds them in such a way, because in Tolkien's mythology, in Middle-earth, an oath is totally sacred and unbreakable, and the mere fact that they vow that they shall not rest until they get the Silmaril means that they never rest because they never get the Silmaril, and so Feanor's spirit remains in the halls of Mandos forever. And his sons then take up the fight in his name, but for Feanor the story ends here. And that indeed ends the video also. So Feanor's story is quite an interesting one, for he does all of these great things in Valinor, and then he's easily swayed by Melkor, but then he basically dies the minute he steps foot in Middle-earth. He's there for no time at all. But his sons, I can tell you, the story passes on to them and passes on to Fingolfin. And it goes down the line, and the Noldor are then forever entwined with the fate of Melkor. And very, very few Noldor ever survive, living in Imladris at the end of days. But to just briefly touch upon the Galadriel thing I mentioned, Galadriel goes with the Noldor. She is banished. The doom of Mandos affects her as well. So she is not allowed to return to Valinor. But when she rejects the ring from Frodo, this is seen as her repentance and her being allowed to go back. And it's referenced in the movie by her saying, "I passed the test, I shall return and be simply Galadriel." And that is her being allowed to go back. So it takes all those years for Galadriel to return. But it does give you a reason as to why in the Hobbit films and Lord of the Rings, Galadriel is made out to be this amazing elf, because she really is, and she's very, very old. She's not the oldest, of course. They do get that wrong in the Hobbit, but she is incredibly old, and she's one of the few of this line of Feanor who actually survive to the Third Age. Most of them don't. Spoiler alert. But that concludes Feanor's video. So I do hope you've enjoyed this. I do hope that I've able to impart some knowledge upon you. I do hope that the microphone quality is better for you all now. But until we speak again, dear friends, Nevair na den per y mad melonin, and farewell.